The dining room in Donald Trump's penthouse on Fifth Avenue was thick with tension, heavier than the aroma of sizzling steaks resting on the table before the three men. It was April 9th, 2025, late in the evening, and beyond the towering windows, Central Park lay shrouded in darkness, with only the faint glow of streetlights piercing through the bare branches swaying in the spring breeze. Candles flickered in massive silver candelabras, casting eerie shadows across the gilded walls adorned with old American-style paintings, prairie landscapes, and portraits of long-forgotten tycoons. The air carried the scent of rosemary mingled with a subtle hint of expensive cologne, perhaps Creed Aventus, a favorite of Trump's from the 80s. Jimmy Kimmel sat to the right, holding a glass of bourbon he hadn't yet touched, his fingers tapping lightly against the crystal in a quiet rhythm that betrayed his inner unease. Across from him, Jimmy Fallon fidgeted with his fork, his eyes darting from his plate of mashed potatoes to the host of the evening. At the head of the table sat Donald Trump, gripping a knife in his hand, not just a utensil, but a symbol of his authority. His reddish hair glinted in the candlelight, and his gaze brimmed with the familiar confidence that people over 55 remembered from his early TV days. "Well, Jimmy Kimmel," Trump began, his voice booming with a theatrical flair that echoed his rally speeches, though softened by a touch of warmth. "You flew all the way from Los Angeles to sit at my table. I thought you'd be too scared to face me in person. Everyone said you hate me, that I'm just a punchline for you. Glad I was wrong. The steaks, by the way, are the best. Ordered them from Peter Luger's. Nobody does it better, believe me." Kimmel smirked, but there was no joy in it, his hand tightening slightly around the glass. He'd just sat down after a 5-hour flight from Burbank, and his mind still buzzed with doubts. Outside, the faint hum of the city drifted through, distant sirens, taxi horns seeping past the thick panes of Trump Tower. He recalled his wife Molly pouring him coffee before he left, saying, "You're looking for trouble again, Jimmy." Maybe she was right, but here he was, in this gilded palace, facing the man he'd skewered on air for years. "I'm not afraid of awkward dinners, Donald," he replied, his voice raspy from fatigue and the bourbon he hadn't sipped, but steady as it was in his sharpest monologues. "Just bad jokes and dull conversations. Haven't figured out yet if you're closer to a comedian or that guy yelling about border walls." Trump laughed, loud and theatrical, like in the old days of The Apprentice, when he'd dismiss contestants with a victorious grimace. The sound bounced off the high ceiling, blending with the soft crackle of the candles. Fallon let out an awkward chuckle, his fork clinking against his plate, leaving a small dent in the mashed potatoes. He looked like he wanted to lighten the mood with one of his signature quips, but his trembling fingers gave away his nerves. "You've always had a sharp tongue, Kimmel," Trump said, slicing a piece of steak and holding it aloft on his fork like a trophy for invisible cameras. "But let's be honest, you think I ruined America, don't you? Everything I did, economy, taxes, the border, it's all trash to you, just fodder for your next monologue. You've been mocking me for years in front of your latte-drinking, Democrat-voting audience. So why are you here if I'm so terrible?" Fallon froze, his fingers gripping the fork so tightly his knuckles whitened, the utensil bending slightly under the pressure. Kimmel felt his pulse thud in his temples, the waxen scent of the candles turning sharp, mixing with a bitterness in his throat. He thought of his viewers, people over 55 who wrote him letters about hospital bills their pensions couldn't cover, about kids who couldn't find jobs after college, about a country they felt slipping away from the one they knew in the 70s. He could have exploded, laid into Trump about the chaos post-2020 election, the tweets that fueled division, the policies he believed left families like his son Billy's unprotected. But he took a deep breath, the cool glass calming his palm, and answered quietly yet firmly, "I don't think you're the enemy, Donald. I think you were wrong about a lot, and often on purpose. But if you really want to talk about it, let's talk. No show, no shouting, no slogans from you or punchlines from me. Just the three of us at this table, you, me, and Fallon, who looks like he's worried we'll start throwing steaks any second." Trump narrowed his eyes, as if bracing for a blow that didn't come. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the knife against the table, a rhythmic sound like a drum roll before a fight. Outside, the wind howled, bending the trees, and a distant taxi horn sounded like a signal from another world. "Just 3 guys at a table, huh?" he repeated, his voice dropping lower, a faint rasp revealing a weariness he rarely showed. "All right, Kimmel, we'll play your game. But I'm not stupid. I know you're not here to compliment my steaks or tell me how great I ran the country. You want to tear me down, just without cameras, so your Hollywood pals don't call you a traitor and your viewers don't switch the channel." Kimmel held his gaze, feeling the tension tighten around his chest like an invisible strap. He knew Trump thrived on provocation. It was his trick from the days of real estate deals and pizza commercials. But this time, Kimmel wasn't biting. "I'm here because I'm tired of shouting in the void, Donald," he said, his voice even but edged like the knife before him. "For years, you've split this country into US and them, the ones wearing your hats and the ones burning them. I've tried to show people that's wrong, that we're losing something big. But what if we're both off? What if the problem isn't you or me, but that we've stopped listening, really listening, not just waiting for our turn to talk?" Trump shoved his steak plate aside with a sharp motion, almost aggressive, as if ready to storm out. His water glass, the only thing he'd drunk all night, wobbled, a few drops spilling onto the white tablecloth, leaving dark stains. He leaned forward, his face closer to Kimmel's than comfortable, his voice rising, almost menacing. "Listening?" he shot back, raising an eyebrow like he did on Fox News. "You think I didn't listen? I listened to millions, Jimmy, people from small towns, factories, farms, the ones you and your TV buddies called fools, racists, backward. I gave them a voice when no one else did, not Obama, not Clinton, not your precious Democrats. And you? You sat in your LA studio, laughing at them and calling it comedy. Have you ever been to Michigan or Ohio, where folks lost everything while you cracked jokes about my hands?" The words hit like a slap, and Kimmel felt indignation flare in his chest. He pictured those letters from viewers, elderly couples struggling with Medicare, veterans whose kids couldn't afford homes, people terrified the America of their youth was gone. But he also recalled how easy it was to mock Trump supporters, their slogans, their hats, their blind faith, without digging into why. He set his glass down, the clink of crystal on would sharpen the silence, and replied, his voice quieter but steely. "I laughed at you, Donald, not them," he said, locking eyes with Trump. "But you're right about something. I didn't always listen. I saw your people as slogans and hats, not their fear, their anger, their sense of being left behind. But you promised to fix it all, bring back factories, make America great again, and then left them with the same problems, just angrier at anyone who disagreed. You call that a win?" Fallon couldn't take it anymore. He shot up, his chair scraping the hardwood floor, and for the first time that night, his voice rang out, not as a peacemaker, but as someone who'd hit his limit. His hands shook, his eyes glinted with strain as he spoke. "Guys, stop please," he exclaimed, his voice cracking on a high note, like when he'd sing parodies on The Tonight Show. "We're supposed to talk, not fight like it's a boxing ring. Donald, you invited us here, said you wanted a real conversation. Jimmy, you flew across the country, left your studio, your family. If we just yell, it's pointless. I don't want to be the guy everyone hates again just for being here, for trying to talk." Trump shifted his gaze to Fallon, his brows knitting together, lips pressing into a thin line. Kimmel felt his anger ebb, replaced by an odd mix of pity and recognition. He remembered how Fallon got roasted after that 2016 episode, ruffling Trump's hair on air, catching flack for normalizing him when all he'd done was play the polite host. How his audience turned on him, how Kimmel himself had piled on in his monologues. Maybe Fallon wasn't just a middleman here. Maybe he was seeking some redemption, some peace in this mess. "Jimmy's right," Fallon said softly, sinking back into his chair, his fork dropping with a faint clink. "We've stopped listening. I felt it myself. My viewers wanted me to fight every guest, and when I didn't, they bailed. I'm not a warrior, Donald, I'm a comedian, like Kimmel. And you, Jimmy, you weren't always this tough. Remember when we laughed at cheesy 90s commercials together? Why are we acting like it's a war now?" Trump leaned back, his fingers ceasing their tapping, and he stared into the space between Kimmel and Fallon for a few seconds. Outside, the wind picked up, branches bending as if trying to break into this gilded room. Then he spoke, his voice calmer, but laced with a challenge that harked back to his debate days. "All right, Fallon, you want a conversation?" he said. "Then tell me, Kimmel, what did I do that you can't forgive? Not politics, not tweets, not my slogans, as you call them, something specific. And don't lie, because I can spot a liar. I've been in business with guys like you for 40 years. Kimmel felt the air thicken, as if the AC had shut off. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his voice low, but cutting like the knife on the tablecloth. He thought back to 2017, the year his son Billy was born with a heart defect, when he stood before cameras and begged the country not to strip healthcare from families like his. When he cried on air and his viewers, people who'd lived through Vietnam, Watergate, 9/11, sent him letters of support. "You know what happened with my son," he said, a shadow of pain flickering in his eyes, a hurt he'd buried under years of jokes. "When Billy was born with a heart defect, I stood in my studio and pleaded on air for people to see why healthcare has to be there for everyone, for kids like him, for families who can't afford $100,000 surgeries. And you? You backed laws that could have taken that away from millions like us. You called it a win when I saw it as parents terrified their kids wouldn't make it to their next birthday. That's what I can't forgive, Donald, not your tweets, not your hair, but putting your wins over people's lives." Trump froze, his hand lowering the knife to the table. Fallon bowed his head, his fingers clutching the tablecloth edge, afraid to look up. The room fell into a dead silence, broken only by the candle's crackle and a distant car horn outside. Kimmel waited, not for shouts or excuses, but for any sign Trump got it. What happened next turned everything upside down. Trump rose slowly, his movements heavy, as if carrying more than just this dinner or his reputation. He walked to the window, staring out at Central Park, where the city lights reflected in puddles from a recent rain. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse, almost broken, like a man revisiting a long-buried wound. "You think I don't know what it's like to fear for family," he said, not turning around. "My brother Fred. He was older than me, my hero. But he drank, Jimmy, drank until it destroyed him. I watched him suffer, heard him beg me to help, and I couldn't do a damn thing, not with money, not with words. He died because he couldn't stop, and I couldn't save him. You think I don't get it? But I can't save everyone, Kimmel, not you, not me, nobody can. I tried to make the country stronger, so kids like your son had a shot. Maybe I did it wrong by your lights, but I'm not the monster you paint me as." Kimmel felt his anger crash into something else, shock, maybe even empathy. He'd read about Fred Trump in old articles, the older brother who never joined the empire, who faded from headlines, leaving Donald alone with his ambitions. Fallon looked up, his eyes glistening with tears he fought to hold back, his voice trembling as he spoke. "God, guys," he said quietly, his hands falling to the table. "I didn't know. I didn't know about your brother, Donald. And Jimmy, I remember that broadcast about Billy. I cried at home watching it. We've all lost something, haven't we? But we're here talking. That's something, right?" Trump turned, his gaze stripped of its usual bravado, no winner's mask, just something raw and human he'd hidden behind loud words and gestures for years. He walked back to the table, picked up his water glass, took a sip, then smiled, not for show, not for ratings, but genuinely, like a man recalling a forgotten truth. "You know, Jimmy," he said, setting the glass down, "my old man, Fred Sr., once told me, 'Donald, you can argue with anybody, but if you can't have a drink with M after, you've lost.' We've been arguing for years, you from your studio, me from my podiums. Maybe it's time for that drink? Not for the press, not for ratings, just because." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, surprised, then let out a quiet, genuine laugh, the first of the night. The sound was soft, almost warm, slicing through the tension like a thread snapping. He stood, lifting his untouched bourbon, feeling the cool glass warm in his hand. "What are we drinking to?" he asked, meeting Trump's eyes with a faint smile that blended skepticism with something new, respect perhaps. "To the fact we can still talk," Trump replied, raising his water glass, his voice firm but free of its usual edge. "And that America, yours and mine, might not be completely done yet." Fallon grabbed his glass, a fruity cocktail with a tiny umbrella, absurdly out of place in this charged setting, and lifted it with a nervous but heartfelt grin. "And to me not being the only one scared of saying the wrong thing anymore," he added, his voice breaking into a laugh that proved infectious. They clinked glasses, the sound clear and ringing, like a signal ending a long battle fought across years. Kimmel took a sip, the bourbon's warmth spreading through his chest, mingling with a relief he hadn't expected tonight. He glanced at Trump, standing with a slight smile, and Fallon, whose shoulders finally relaxed, his face glowing with joy that they hadn't trashed the room. Outside, the wind died down and New York's lights seemed brighter, as if the city sensed something pivotal had happened here. "You know, Donald," Kimmel said, setting his glass down and wiping a drop of bourbon from the corner of his mouth, "I'm not going to stop joking about you. My audience expects it, and frankly, you give me too much material. But maybe next time I'll think before calling you a clown. Maybe." Trump laughed, loud and hearty, like the old days when he was just a businessman with a TV gig, loving the spotlight. The sound echoed off the walls, and even the paintings seemed to quiver. "And I won't stop calling your jokes dumb, Kimmel," he shot back, pointing a finger without malice. "You and your liberal monologues, a total disaster, believe me. But if you want to talk again, the door's open. Next time, I'll order pizza. These steaks are too pricey even for me, and you didn't even finish yours." Fallon burst out laughing, high and clear like a kid who dodged a grounding. He leaned back, cradling his cocktail, and looked at them with relief. "You two are like watching an old WrestleMania match," he said, grinning. "I thought one of you was going to leap over the table. But you know what? This is the best dinner I've had in years. No cameras, no scripts, just us." They lingered a while longer, chatting about silly 80s shows like Alf and Knight Rider, about how Fallon once spilled coffee on Kimmel's suit before a 2005 taping, forcing him to host with a stain, about how Trump locked himself in a Trump Tower elevator in the 90s and yelled until security came. These were simple human stories, no politics, no ratings, no masks they wore for the public. The candles burned low, wax dripping onto the silver holders, and the rosemary scent faded, replaced by cool air seeping through a window crack. The ornate gold clock on the wall, probably worth more than a small town's budget, chimed midnight, and Kimmel checked his phone. A plane waited at JFK to take him back to L.A. He stood, extending a hand to Trump. Trump shook it, no extra force this time, just a man-to-man grip, his palm warm and slightly rough, like someone used to signing deals and shaking hands. "Thanks for dinner, Donald," Kimmel said, his voice soft but sincere. "And the talk. Didn't think I'd say this, but it was interesting." "Thanks for coming, Kimmel," Trump replied, his eyes glinting with that familiar spark, but without the usual challenge. "And don't forget, I could still sue you for libel. Got the best lawyers, believe me." Kimmel smiled, wider this time. "And I could still win. I've got jokes you couldn't handle in court." Fallon stood and hugged Kimmel, brief but tight, his hands trembling with emotion. "You're the man," he whispered, his voice low but warm. "We all are. Weird night, but I'm glad we did it." Kimmel nodded and headed for the door. The elevator descended slowly, its hum blending with the echo of their conversation in his mind. When the doors opened, New York's cold air hit him, carrying the smell of hot pretzels from a street vendor and the distant buzz of a city that never sleeps. He climbed into a black SUV, and as it rolled down Fifth Avenue, he looked out the window. Skyscraper lights reflected in puddles. An lone plane blinked in the sky above Manhattan, maybe his, waiting at JFK. On the plane, he pulled out his phone and opened his notes. His fingers hovered over the screen, then typed. "Tonight, I sat down with a guy I thought was my enemy. We argued, shouted, dug up our pains. Then we had a drink together. And you know what? He's just a person, like me, like Fallon, like all of us." He wasn't sure if he'd tell this story on air. Maybe it'd stay a secret between the three of them. A quiet moment in a world of headlines. But as the plane took off, New York's lights fading below, Kimmel felt something he hadn't in ages. Lightness, joy, euphoria that even in the darkest times, one table, one talk, and one glass of bourbon could remind him hope wasn't dead. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and thought, maybe we're not so different. Maybe we can still change something.